All right. Hello, everyone. I've been having trouble with the video. This one has quiz has 27 questions on it. I gave you a freebie last time. Not asking a lot of picky, unique questions here. It's a challenging novel, and I was really pleased to have had a chance to read it twice. And I've now downloaded the other three novels in the series. I want to read also his book about Trotsky and Trotsky's murder called The Man Who Loved Horses. If you notice in our novel that I don't think the word Castro is really ever mentioned, so he doesn't attack the Cuban authorities. But in The Man Who Loved Horses, he attacks all, despots, all kind of tyrannical leaders, dictatorships and things like that. So he is careful about um, how he goes about his business. And Lieutenant Mario Conde, the Count, is is indicative of the hard times during which Padura depicts this novel. Now, Havana Red takes place in one of Conde's most disgusted times of the year, which is August and the heat. Uh, and you can just feel it permeating the book, especially in the opening pages. It just feels like you can just feel the oppressive humidity and how it affects him. Now, politically, again, it's not really talked about a lot, but Havana Red takes place in 1989. At the very beginning of what's called the special period. And this one is one of economic hardship. It's when the Soviet Union um, uh, cut off all aid, all the tremendous amount of money that it pumped into the Cuban economy when the Soviet Union fell apart. I have to make a note to make some changes here as we move along. Um, the And of course, many people refer to Mario, his friends in particular, Mario Conde, as the Count. Um, he's 35 years old, been a policeman for quite a while, and those, especially his friends and people at work, refer to him as this. Everybody likes to call him that. Now, when the novel opens, we learn that Conde, the Count, is working in something called the Information Bureau at police headquarters. He's not his usual Lieutenant Conde detective. He's been put on hold, if you will, because he got into an alteration with a fellow police officer, Lieutenant Fabricio. Now, this, I believe, is from another of the Havana books. The one that we're reading got published first, but is, I believe, the second in the series. And so in the first one, we find out why he got into a fisticuffs with Fabricio. And then we find that, it's at this time that Major Ringel calls and says, look, we got a nasty case, and he's going to lift Conde from the shadows and get him back on the job. And when he solves the crime, the investigative people and whatnot tell him how happy they are and that they're going to get him off of this 6 months punishment, if you will. Uh, he doesn't like a lot of the people he has to work with. And then, as we find out, some of them he thought were his best friends and he admired are in fact corrupt. Now, the Count has quite some close friends, but his closest friend is Skinny Carlos, and he's known since his childhood. And he weighs over 250 pounds and requires a wheelchair. And that's because, I'm trying to think, in 69, I got to get the date right, but it's 89. So um, Skinny Carlos was went into the Cuban military, and the military Cuba sent thousands of troops into Angola, and Skinny got shot in the back in Namibia, um, which at that time was sort of part of South Africa. The war in Angola took a lot of lives for the Cuban soldiers, but actually the soldiers with Angola and the independence there defeated the South African army is one of the reasons for the downfall of apartheid, and another reason that Mandela had a lot of respect for Fidel Castro, which didn't sit well with a lot of the Western countries. So, anyway, Skinny got caught up and he got shot, and thus he's in the wheelchair. He can't walk, but the Count likes to go over. Um, Now it's funny because of the way Cuba operates. Uh, that Skinny says, Red Candito has a piloto, and it's kind of an illegal bar, and Conde goes with his friend Skinny, even though he's a police officer, and even though it's an illegal bar, uh, because he wants a cold beer. So everybody sort of bends the laws a little bit, and so, but Red Candito is also a good friend of Skinny and Conde. They grew up together. And when Conde finds out later in the novel that he is under investigation, and not just to protect himself, but he does go to Red and say, "Look, watch out! The internal affairs people are looking into me," and he thinks he might lose his job, but he does try to protect his friend. Um, Now, in the novel, rather early in the novel, we do learn because the case that Alexis Arian's murder is seen to be a transvestite, and yeah, homosexual. And we learn really early in the novel that Conde is pretty darn homophobic. Uh, Not an unusual thing in Cuba, given how since the revolution, um, the homosexuals, the community has been treated in Cuba. It's changing a little bit, but it's still precarious for a lot of people. And anyway, one of the great things one of the things I really like about the novel is the extent to which we learn how Conde solves cases, and he brings all things into it. He's realizes that first when he goes to see the body where it's murdered, he looks around for things and gathers up, what might be evidence, ask a lot of questions, but he realizes from his early Christian training, he's a lapsed Catholic, if anything, that the murder was on August 6th, and that's the Catholic celebration of the Transfiguration, uh, when Christ appears to the apostles in a bright light and whatnot. But it's and so Conde automatically feels like this might be something because he equates the transvestitism with change and things along those lines. But he doesn't really understand at the beginning what actually happens with he doesn't understand anything about homosexuality except that he thinks that they're all pansies and he doesn't like to be around them. Now Alexis Arian's father, Faustino, um, of course, plays an important role since, well, he killed his son, as we learn later on, is Cuba's latest representative at UNICEF and is a high government functionary. So he's rich compared to all the other Cubans, including people like Conde, who live in a place in Old Havana or right outside of that. And it's sometimes the heat works, sometimes it doesn't. And everybody is on rations. I mean, you find Conde saying sometimes, oh, he had enough for 2 more days of coffee. He doesn't have a lot of money. He doesn't get paid a lot, so he has to be careful. But the father, Faustino, early on, Conde's sidekick says, "Oh, maybe it's the father or something. We can't do that. We can't be him." But one of the people, because of the nature of it, that he goes to visit Alberto Marquis, which I've spelled with two S's. But anyway, now he was a friend of the boys, but he's also a very sensational figure. Um, because he's a highly regarded figure in the avant-garde theater until his fall from grace in 1921 when the government silenced him. Now, 10 years later, it turns out the writers' union and whatnot tried to bring him back to, uh, you know, prominence, but his revenge at that point was um, he's not going to do anything. He'll stay working as a lowly librarian and stealing books. But the government silenced him because he was not considered to be part of the revolution. He was seen as bourgeois because he hung out with people like Sartre and others in Paris. And it gets a little more complex than that as we move through the novel. Now, the examination of Alexis Arian's body reveals two 1 peso coins inserted into his rectum. And the question of why he did it and things like that, a lot of it just has to do that his father was trying to throw people off the course, figuring that it must have been some homosexual, death or something along those lines. Now, one of the other things we learn about the Count is, like, well, many people who made choices in their life and wish that maybe they hadn't done what they did. But we learned that when the Count was 16 years old, he wrote his first short story for a journal called La Vibarena. Now, the government deemed appropriate for publication, so it never saw the light of publication. There were copies of it, and Skinny has one of the copies and treasures it, just as he treasures Conde's friendship. Okay, and now I like. We also meet Josephina, Skinny's mother, who just adores Skinny and dotes on him, and has a soft spot for the Count. She loves her son and the Count, and she makes wonderful meals for them and is supportive of both of them. I just like she's so funny. There's telling everybody that the long, long talk about what she's going to make, where she learned to make it. Now, um, the Conde likes Major Wrangle, his boss, um, and so he used to really love the coffee, but this new secretary doesn't have any. So he brings his boss Monte Cristo cigar that he got at Alexis's house, and that will become very important in the case. As we return, we find out that the Count really, he kind of goes by the information when all the things fall together, as we see. Now, Major Wrangle informs the Count that internal investigation questions Manolo, the Count's partner, because of Conde's recent behavior, his fight with Fabrico, leading the Count to worry, really, that his career will end in 35 years, at 35 years old. Now, Wrangle, as we learn later on, is, telling partial the truth when we find out that they're there because of word of potential corruption. And Conde's recent behavior, where he punched out Fabrico, kind of throws up some red flags. For instance, they want to know why the fight. Was it because they were fighting over rival corruption? Or, like Wrangle said, maybe it's just what it is, that he really didn't like the guy. And that's exactly what it is. But there is an investigation going on. Now, in terms of the investigation, Marquise gives to the court what what I write. I mean, what does he give him in terms of the investigation? And that would be right. He it turns out that he loved the boy, but not as a lover, and the boy's the family maid has come to he takes care of Alexis now and again, um, and but he finds the missing pages from Alexis' Bible about the Transfiguration. Remember, the Count had found the Bible at Marquise's house because the boy had a room there, and those pages were missing, and so that's why he's so locked into this Transfiguration because of that. And there's a note on there, a note written by, as it turns out, Alexis. Maybe that's why he goes to see his former priest, because he wants to get all the information he can, not just about what he's learning from the Count about homosexuality and the true nature of transvestites. The boy is not a transvestite, but he does this. Uh, which you have to ask, why does he, you know, um, take on that beautiful red dress that featured in the great play the Count was never allowed to perform um, when he came back from Paris in 1969. Now, Marquis shares with the Count the fact that Alexis was afraid of killing himself because, remember, they're thinking, was he suicidal? And the Count says, tells the Marquis tells the Count that Alexis was afraid of killing himself because Alexis was a Catholic and Catholicism condemns suicide, but his religion also condemned homosexuality. Um, but as we find out, he did want he couldn't kill himself, but he was afraid of killing himself. So what he's going to do, and what he did, is that he um, incited his father to do the act. And we'll get to that in a little while. Now, from Maria Antonia, the longtime servant of Alexis' parents, Conde gets confirmation. As it turns out, she knows a lot. In fact, she knows, well, that the writing on the missing pages from Alexis' Bible that the Marquis gave or found in his play are in Alexis's hand, and that the medallion the service found belonged not to Alexis' mother, but to Alexis. And the question was, okay, who put it there? And of course, it'll be the father. And Maria Antonia also knows that when the father came home that night, his pants were muddy and there were red um, threads on his trousers. So she puts together who killed and will confirm that eventually to Conde. Now, when Conde goes with the Marquis to to a gathering of homosexuals and transvestites, he goes with them. There's a budding friendship. Um, he ends up spending a night of what I suggest is energetic sex with Polly Sparrow Bun, and in the end of the novel, he'll go to her and going to spend 3 or 4 days, and who knows, maybe he'll have a healthy relationship. So there is a little hopefulness at the end of the story. Now, but in many respects, Conde becomes more and more fond of the Marquis, and we see that friendship's not going to end by the end of the novel. But he first characterized him as a pansy and a predatory homosexual because that was the government um, uh, propaganda about him. But he leads Conde to write this 8-page short story about a bus driver who kills a woman for what you might say no obvious reason. He just decides to do it. That's the first short story he's written, 8 pages in a long time, and a lot of it's inspired by his budding relationship with the Marquis. Now, Skinny Carlos is at 250 pounds and confined to a wheelchair, remember, because he was shot in the back in Namibia. He's worrying a lot because a girl, uh, Dulcina, he's very fond of, and she went to the United States. And when he was actually skinny before he got shot and became an invalid and obese, um, is going to come to visit. And that doesn't happen by the end of the novel, but that's another thing that's going to happen. And of course, Conde feels bad, and just we're just going to see what happens now. Oh, I like this. Is before Conde, the Count shows the Marquis his his short story. He first brings it over to his friend Skinny, who just goes. Going to have a dinner there. He shows him the story, um, and he's enjoying a special dinner that Skinny's mother Josephina prepared to celebrate the Count's short story. Skinny mentions that they should smoke a Monte Cristo to really, really nail the celebration. And at that moment, in a flash of intuition, Conde realizes who did the murdering, and he goes back and he gets remember, he gets the cigars and shown that they're rolled the same way, but he also has the medallion that was taken off the boy, the son, and put there by someone else. And of course the maid knows, and then she will reveal the bit about the pants will undo um, the father, who will admit to murder. Um, Now, the major reveals to Conde that the former secretary, of whom Conde was very fond, Marucci's, I was saying, where is she? And it turns out that she worked for internal investigations and was the agent they placed outside the major's office. And her observations led to the investigation of the major and others, and including Conde's friend, and someone the major didn't thought he was the great cop too, and that uncovered him to be completely on the take all the time. And so it's colored the major. It's made Conde stand out because of his own fights. Maybe he was fighting about illegal activities. I mean, this is how the whole thing gets out. Now, the Marquis, very important that Skinny and his mother are thrilled with what Conde's done. Now, they love him. But the Marquis also enjoys Conde's stories and offers a title. And the title is Iron in the Soul, which is an homage to the Marquis's friend, Jean-Paul Sartre. He of the great existential fame, whose company Marquis enjoyed when in 1969, that year, 68, 69, famous years of revolution and revolt in Paris at that time, the student revolt, and also was the high point of existentialism. So, Iron in the Soul, the title of the story. Now, Faustino, because of all the evidence, does admit to the authorities that he murders his son. The Marquis, though, tells Conde the reason that Alexis' father killed him. Remember, he's afraid of suicide, but there is a lot of self-loathing. He's been ostracized by his parents. He's a very sad figure. He loves art. And see, the father has said he killed the boy because the boy provoked him. Now, Alexis related that he planned to tell his father something he learned from Maria Antonio, that Faustino lied in 1959 about his fighting clandestinely against Batista, the dictator, Castro and Che Guevara and others overclaimed, so that he could climb on the chariot of the revolution. Now, this information would be devastating for the father's career. And so that's when after they realized that Faustino is the one who does it, this is when the Marquise relates probably the thing that sent the father over the top. It's something that the boy had learned from the maid, Maria Antonia. So that's probably what he told his father, and it's at that point that the father, strangled him with the um, what's the word I want to use? The scarf that was around. Now, in the end of the novel, reveals Conde wants to know the identity of the other, and who, by the way, as the Marquise reveals to Conde, who, with the help of Alexis's father in 1969 and 70, whatever, smeared both the Marquis and his friend Muscles, and that led to the Marquise's punishment. So um, this is something that the Marquise has known all along, but it's only now becomes important, and the Count wants to know who the other is, who's a high functionary, and the Marquise refuses to uh, tell him the identity of the other. He says you should be able to figure that one out on your own. But the other got into trouble, and Alexis's father worked for the government at the time, and was the one that took the other back to Cuba. And he said that, and then the Marquis says he papered him. Other did through Alexis's father with all kinds of lies and things like that about Muscles and the Marquis. So let's just say the Marquis is not sad to learn that Alexis's father has died. And at the end, there's another if you want to, all these kinds of transformations and whatnot. All for the 20 years the Marquise, as another great of the poets, Cuban poets, reveals to Conde that he just silently he responded his revenge with silence, and the poet says, and I just keep writing and writing, but he said the Marquise, even when he was invited back out of the cold, if you will, he refused. This is great revenge, if you will, was not writing, was silence, working in that small library. But he chose, at the novel's conclusion, with the past 20 years, when everybody thinks or thought that he was just doing his thing and maintaining dignity, whatever you want. In fact, he's done an impressive amount of writing that he's composed in secret, new plays, another book. So this is a building of trust between the two people who seem such antagonists at the beginning of the novel, and it shows Conde's growth and his intellectual development. He makes a good cop, but he's also a good reader. And in one of the books after these, they say, I can't remember, but it's about Hemingway, whom Padura knew. And I don't know that he liked him all that much, but Conde becomes a writer and it will eventually leave the police force, and then is seeking this information about Hemingway. So Conde is a fertile character, obviously, and I hope you enjoyed the novel. It's a rough one in some parts. We haven't gotten into, let's say, the sex lives, really, that personal depth of other characters we've met in the first three novels that we read, but in this one we do. And we go in different directions now, because we're going to go from the Caribbean to Asia, and in particular Japan and India. So I hope you all do a good job on the quiz. And now I have to find the movie, and voila.